Azov's assault on the Donetsk line hit the Russian forward positions around Pokrovsk like a wave of ups and downs.
Либо вы сдаетесь, либо мы вас убиваем.
The advance teams directed the armored infantry team toward their targets using the real-time coordinates shared by reconnaissance UAVs. All Azov had to do was press the button and consign the Russian forces in Pokrovsk to history.
Ми знаходимося в місті Покровськ на площі Шибанкова, біля міської ради. Місто контролює ЗСУ на 100%. Слава Україні! Героям слава!
Meanwhile, there is a donation campaign for Ukraine by United24 in the video description. If you want to take part in the fight for freedom, we are waiting for your support. Now let's get back to our main topic. The coordinated attack seen in the drone footage simultaneously struck Russian trench entrances, supply points, and machine gun nests in the area. Fire was maintained without interruption, and transitions between positions were completed before counterfire developed. Within minutes, footholds were secured at 2 separate points, and the escape routes of the Russian forces forced to retreat in Pokrovsk were locked down by the second wave. Azov elements used drones as a fire and reconnaissance screen without leaving the infantry column exposed. The description on the ground showed the following without exaggeration: coordinates, duration, accuracy, discipline. As soon as the first layer of Russian defense in Pokrovsk was broken, sabotage teams in the flanking sectors had to cover their retreat with smoke. The attack focused on cutting and narrowing the existing Russian salient rather than opening a new breach in the defense line. Thus, Azov's first move targeted not the width of the line, but the breathing space of Russian forces. In fact, before all these operations, the Pokrovsk-Dobropillia axis had appeared to be a tactical opportunity for the Russians in the middle of summer, but it had produced weakness when they couldn't maintain their pace. ISW updates recorded that Ukraine had gained ground around key settlements such as Volodymyrivka and Mikhailivka. Global media sources reported that Ukrainian counterattacks cut off 2 Russian prongs around Pokrovsk and pushed the line back. This picture showed that the Russian army's broad encirclement plan in Pokrovsk-Dobropillia had cracked, and the salient was squeezed into a narrow pocket. Simultaneous pressure applied by Azov on the northern and southern flanks of the Pokrovsk line shortened the route of Russian troops and put fortified crossings at risk. Ukrainian forces conducted the battle in the pocket with a logic of clearing and locking, leaving advancing attack waves without logistics. Long-range precision strikes were shifted to depots and staging areas in the rear. This disrupted the forward line's fuel, ammunition, and evacuation rhythm. Controlled compression, rather than rapid advance, reduced losses while solidifying the ground. This method aligned with the goal of depriving the encircled Russian forces of options. Field reports and official announcements pointed to a cluster of 6 settlements in Donetsk being liberated or entered by the Azov battalion's operations. The directly confirmed triple core was Zeleny High, Mikhailivka, and Volodymyrivka, and a counter-offensive for Novomikhailivka was reflected on the ground. Additionally, Ukrainian army positional gains around Novokonomichne and tactical entries into Mern entered OSINT and corporate reports. This cluster was woven with successive and connected point gains rather than a single big leap. Each settlement gained importance not in open terrain but through road networks and local elevations. Therefore, the term 6 settlements describes the cumulative effect of small nodes that form a strip on the military map. The key point is that these nodes collectively constrict Pokrovsk's north-south breathing space. Thus, the Ukrainian army's new forward positions became a foundation for the next range layer. The Ukrainian command also framed this advance not as a broad offensive, but as a limited yet target-oriented recapture. This definition imposes a sustainable tempo and logistical realism on the force. Azov's role, meanwhile, was not just a frontline assault, but the construction of a drone-centric, close reconnaissance, close destruction corridor. Videos from National Guard sources clearly showed moments when the Azov battalion dispersed Russian assault groups with FPV drones in the Pokrovsk sector. These videos revealed chains of destruction on a minute-by-minute scale, focused not on Russian armored elements, but on small units gathered in open areas. At the same time, IR and EO cameras were seen marking underground shelter entrances. This marking was completed not with classic artillery adjustments, but with the final approach decisions of the FPVs. The clearest difference seen on the ground was in the speed of target matching through the shared channel use of UAV operators and infantry. Ukrainian drone operators caught a Russian military convoy or gathering before it dispersed and completed the strike without waiting for a second wave. This flow concretized the loss-reducing benefit of keeping the sea-to-side strike cycle short. The methods used by Azov were linked to procedures that backed up short-range data transmission, even in an RFEW-dense environment. Therefore, engagement remained sustainable under the authority of the nearest operator, even during electronic suppression. Meanwhile, the intensification of fighting in a 10 to 15 kilometer band north of Pokrovsk showed that Russian defenses were retreating piecemeal rather than in a linear fashion. This band consists of rural settlements and small plains, within short distance of supply routes. Ukrainian forces operated not from trench to trench in this area, but from trench cluster to trench cluster. Thus, rather than expecting a single breakthrough with a single outcome, a gradual pushback was preferred. The pressure in the north was supported by a coordinated movement in the south, near Mikhailivka. This coordinated movement forced the Russian flank to make decisions in two directions simultaneously. The wrong decision either prolonged resupply or closed the window for a counterattack. Therefore, Russian forces were forced into a gradual withdrawal rather than holding their ground. Ukrainian forces, meanwhile, locked in new lines by repeating the short-range clear and hold template. This lock-in created a front line that remained unshaken in the first hours of the counterattack. The surprise infiltrations on the Dobropillia line also showed how an advance that couldn't maintain its momentum broke down after the first 48 hours. When mechanized follow-up fails to materialize, a breach transforms from a tactical gain into a strategic problem. Ukraine filled this void with Azov and other elite units, turning the tide. Part of the new gains seen on the ground were made possible by closing this breach window. The recapture did not happen spontaneously, but through a planned series of cuts and locks. The Ukrainian command extinguished the surprise fire by establishing a defense-offense balance in the same language. Reinforcements from flanking sectors absorbed the accumulated Russian pressure. This absorption accelerated the consumption of the enemy's equipment. Timing was linked to the goal of sustainable attrition rather than speed. Ukraine thus thwarted the attempt to turn infiltration into a permanent gain. While claims about numbers on the ground varied, the heavy Russian buildup in the Pokrovsk sector and the transfer of high-level units were repeated in different sources. This buildup appears to have been the basis for the offensive pressure plans. However, the buildup alone did not produce results, and the logistics manpower synchronization was not sufficiently established. Intense counterfire from drones by Azov and allied units sequentially targeted small unit clusters. This sequential selection prioritized targets that disrupted the rhythm rather than high-prestige targets. Thus, in Pokrovsk and even across the Donetsk region, supply and regrouping flows in the rear were narrowed. Disorder occurred not at the front line, but behind it, and this disorder came to the fore. The Russian plan remained a truncated U rather than a broad O. Ukraine, meanwhile, did not stop at separating the two arms of the U, but narrowed its interior. This scenario increased the cost of massing and reduced the effectiveness of reinforcements. Azov's pattern of behavior on the ground was to combine the drone infantry fire triad in a single conformation. The FPV strikes in the National Guard footage scattered the advancing attack arms within minutes. Trigger delays were reduced by bridging weak signal moments with a short-range antenna repeater arrangement. The opposing side's UAV adaptations based on repeaters and fiber optic lines continued to be monitored as a separate threat. This threat attempted to put pressure on supply and main routes from further behind. The Ukrainian side fragmented its road networks and turned to alternative route planning. Azov maintained a short-run, short-strike pattern in the narrow streets of the settlement periphery. This pattern chose intermittent progress in closed terrain rather than spreading out in open areas. This choice prevented armored elements from becoming exposed targets. Therefore, armor was used safely and limited to a lever role rather than a striking role. So why did the Azov battalion and the Ukrainian military units assisting this group try so hard for Pokrovsk in Donetsk? Operationally, Pokrovsk's tactical value is explained by its focus point in the railway and road network. This focus acts as a lifeline to the Kramatorsk-Slovyansk defense line in the north. The Russian encirclement plan had to extend its arms to cut this lifeline. Ukraine sabotaged the rendezvous by loading the joints of the arms, not the line of convergence. This prevented the pressure from the two arms from converging in the middle. When the arms do not converge, a salient is formed instead of an encirclement. A protrusion is open to fire from both the side and the rear. Azov and other elements' drone-based pincer movements turned this vulnerability into an opportunity. The result was costly attrition instead of the sweeping propaganda victory Russia could have achieved. The Ukrainian side countered this costly plan through the Azov battalion's struggle and low-cost disruptions. One of Azov's tasks on the Dobropillia flank was to quickly seal infiltration windows. Quick sealing involves clearing positions with focused fire within a 12 to 24-hour window and establishing a short defensive line. This scheme solidifies the existing relative superiority rather than creating new offensive opportunities. The Ukrainian command prioritized holding strong rather than unnecessary expansion. This choice was a rational decision, given the limited ammunition and manpower balance. At the same time, it sent a message that we are maintaining political communication and advancing selectively. Azov's approach supported this message on the ground with successive secure gains rather than instant successes. Drone footage captured these moments as a series of small setbacks and retreats. Even footage shot by the opposing side for propaganda purposes could not hide the rhythm of the Russian army's attrition. Having lost their rhythm in Pokrovsk, the Russians also lost the integrity of their plan. Of course, the coordination of the units working alongside Azov was effective and was mentioned in different sources by name. It was recorded that National Guard units, such as Spartan, performed an injection role in the Pokrovsk sector. As the space narrowed, assigning reinforcements to tasks rather than locations proved effective. The logic of cut off this flow instead of holding this piece of land was applied on the ground. Cutting off the flow yielded more results with fewer bullets than attacking open targets. Therefore, empty intersections and closed roads produced results as much as images of destruction. Azov made these network disruptions sustainable with small drone cells. Target selection was based on mission value rather than vehicle type. This allowed the same ammunition to have a greater impact on the logistical hub. In short, priority was given to where to strike, not what to strike. As important as the field narrative was the issue of verification and conceptual framework. ISW and independent verification channels clarified the question of where and what happened with geographically verified images. Ukrainian military sources, meanwhile, reported in confident terms how counter-offensive maneuvers cut off the two-pronged infiltration. Other sources on the region noted how both sides used the new drone methods. A short-cycle decision was observed on the Ukrainian side, while a long-cycle dominance tendency was seen on the Russian side. The short cycle evaluated the opportunity in small pieces. The long cycle wore down while waiting for the convergence objective. This difference created two different outcomes on the same terrain. Azov's method tipped the cost-benefit balance in favor of the short cycle. The end result was small but secure progress. The strategic message on the ground was simple. The plan for a wide encirclement along the Pokrovsk-Dobropillia line did not work. Russian forces were trapped in a pocket and unable to join forces. Ukraine is reducing the internal volume of this pocket. The Azov battalion is accelerating this reduction with a drone infantry fire triad and limited armored leverage. Progress is marked by small squares rather than large arrows. When these squares come together, control of road networks and local elevations is regained. The key is not aggressive expansion, but sustained pressure that does not disrupt the rhythm. When this key is turned, the other side's options diminish. Left with no options, the side either suffers unnecessary losses or retreats. The rhythm on the ground over the last 2 weeks shows that retreats are increasing. The Ukrainian leadership's rhetoric of settlement liberalization also provided a framework that strengthened political communication. Zelensky's emphasis on the most difficult sector for the Pokrovsk-Dobropillia line explained the cost of tactical successes to the public without hiding anything. This explanation also sent two messages to the coalition of support. First, the war is not a stalemate, and gains on the ground are possible. Second, these gains are not extensive and risky, but limited and sustainable. Therefore, continuity of supply is more valuable than one-off packages. Azov's performance on the ground demonstrated the value of this continuity. As long as the flow of ammunition and electronic support is not interrupted, small gains are likely to accumulate. Rather than waiting for a single major breakthrough, the sum of small gains should be preferred. The Pokrovsk-Dobropillia rhythm has signaled that this sum is growing confidently. Risks are not absent in the next phase, and they are grouped under concrete headings. First, it is possible that the Russian side will attempt another speed test with concentrated glide bombs and FPV packages. Second, EWGPS pressure can create interruptions at certain moments, despite short-range controls. Third, backup manpower planning may increase the risks of keeping the same units in continuous rotation. In addition, fragile points in the road network may weaken again due to precipitation and fatigue, and interruptions in the long-range ammunition rhythm may slow down the advance of small squares. The answers for Ukraine to these risks are also clear. UAV FPV production and operator training should be increased, and short-cycle decision support software should be widely adopted. Secondary routes for road networks should be prepared in advance, and material stocks should be gradually transferred to nearby nodes. Unit rotations should be planned in short periods, but with overlapping shifts. Azov's current response on the ground is a validation of a method in the bigger picture. At the heart of this method lies low-cost but high-precision engagement. Capital-intensive platforms emerge as a striking lever when the risk is low. The big picture changes with the sum of small gains. The Pokrovsk-Dobropillia series provided a concrete set of examples proving this. In the coming weeks, the same scheme can be applied in adjacent sectors. This requires cutting the weak nodes of the network one by one, rather than focusing on a single point. Azov and its collaborating elements are ready for these cuts. The result will be to narrow the options for a broad encirclement maneuver. This narrowing also translates into a stronger hand at the negotiating table. In summary, Azov's role on the Donetsk front has thwarted the Russian plan on the Pokrovsk and Dobropillia line. Progress has been measured by the logic of continuous strikes, not a single blow. The liberated and entered settlements are small but critical building blocks in correcting the line. The drone infantry fire triad has worked successfully despite intense RFEW conditions. Logistical flows have been turned against the enemy, not in their favor. Every small step taken on the ground has rendered the grand plan a little more invalid. The discipline and decision cycle demonstrated by Azov is one of the proofs on the ground. The next phase is the phase of putting small squares together with the same discipline. If this phase is executed correctly, the Russian siege scenario will be doomed to another delay. Thank you for watching.